Welcome to Guided, your weekly sanctuary where we blend the wisdom of the Enneagram with the art of intentional living. I'm your host Evie, and you're so welcome here. Guided is all about helping you, the modern woman, find your flow in a world that's often all hustle and no heart. Whether you're navigating a career pivot, diving into creative pursuits, or just figuring out how to take better care of yourself, Guided is here to support you. This podcast is like a weekly chat with a good friend, one who's passionate about making your life feel good. At Guided, we believe in living with intention, fostering emotional well-being, and finding joy in the everyday. We tackle the big stuff like overthinking, setting boundaries, and avoiding burnout, all while keeping it real and relatable. Think of this as your go-to spot for practical tips, soulful conversations, and a reminder to break free from the grind. So grab your favorite drink, get comfy, and let's dive in. Thank you for choosing to make Guided a part of your weekly ritual. If you're ready to step into a life of intention and empowerment, then hit that subscribe button and let's get started. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Guided. If this is your first time here, hi, my name is Evie, your self-appointed online big sister, guiding you towards the most aligned and empowered version of you. Today's episode is such a juicy one, you guys. I'm thrilled to be talking about boundaries. And I think, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I didn't know a boundary if it introduced itself to me. You know, I have done so much work on boundaries in the past, throughout my 20s. And yeah, I feel so deeply in my bones that we need to talk about this episode today, because we need to talk about boundaries today, because nearly every single one of my clients over the past week, our sessions have come back to boundaries. And I think sometimes after Christmas, when we're moving into the new year, when we're moving into 2025, perhaps boundaries have got a little bit lost. And so today's episode is called Emotional Boundaries, Protecting Your Peace Without Guilt. And that might sound like some far out dream. Eve, what are you talking about? I'm not going to feel guilty when I'm saying my boundaries. Guys, I think there's a way to do it. And we're going to talk about what that way looks like today. But before we jump in, I just really wanted to invite you, when you're listening to this, it will be probably, almost to the day, a month away from the next seasonal reset, the spring equinox seasonal reset, my online meditation journaling class that I offer once a quarter. That is coming up the evening before the spring equinox in March. That's coming up on Wednesday the 19th at 7:30 Greenwich Mean Time. And I just wanted to invite you. We talked about it a little bit last week in last week's episode, but if you are looking to have something booked in that is going to revive you, if you're looking for a space to come and be that is completely your own, away from family obligations, away from work obligations, if you're looking for a spa for the soul, this is what this evening is. Come and be rested, come and renew, come and prepare yourself for spring. Let go of what you need to let go of, leave behind what you need to leave behind, and let's spend some time being really intentional about the next season. What can we learn from spring? How can we begin to move in the same sort of rhythm as spring? What is ready to bloom within you? It's going to be so good. I really, really hope that if that is kind of pulling at your heartstrings now, I hope that you'll make use of the early bird offer we have out at the moment and come and grab your ticket today. I wouldn't wait a moment longer, you guys. You don't want to miss out on that early bird. And if you're listening to this and thinking, oh, well, wasn't there an extra early bird already? Yes, there was. If you're part of my mailing list, you'll know that there was an extra early bird offering, which a good chunk of you made use of. So that is also, so I would also sign up to my mailing list if you love a good deal and steal. Sometimes I offer those to my mailing list only. So do sign up. All the links for everything, the sign up link for my mailing list and The link to grab your ticket is just in the description box below. If you scroll down into the show notes, they are there. If you've got any questions, send me a DM, and hopefully we will all see each other on Wednesday, the 19th of March. It's going to be delightful. Okay, back to it, you guys. So why does this topic matter then? Why do boundaries, this idea, this dream that we have around boundaries, why does it matter so much? Well, I think the struggle with guilt is a real one. That was highly evidenced by many different Enneagram types that I had in session with me this week. I think the fear of conflict around boundaries is huge. And I think the societal conditioning, especially for women, excuse me, we are still undoing that. Yeah. And maybe if you're a similar age to me, you're beginning to move further and further into that deconditioning. Maybe if you're further on than me, you've done a really good job. And maybe if you're a little bit younger, you're thinking, I don't think I'll ever be free. I don't know that I'll ever not be able to just go along with what everybody wants. And I don't know that I'll ever be able to have boundaries. Girlfriend, you will. You will. I didn't believe it either, but I'm here to tell you, you can do this. So what we're going to talk about in this episode then, we are going to talk about what emotional boundaries actually are and what they aren't. We're going to talk about the common myths around boundary setting. Yeah, I think nearly half of it is going on in our heads. Let's get that out. Let's do a bit of myth busting. We're going to talk about, of course, the Enneagram and boundary setting and how you, dependent on your Enneagram type, can set those boundaries with a little more ease. If you're thinking, whoa, hey, what's the Enneagram? I don't know what that is. Head back to episode 2, 3, and 4, or just scroll down in the show notes and grab my free Enneagram quiz. Find out which type you are. You'll be a type between 1 and 9, and listen out for that number. Your mind will be blown. We're going to talk a little bit about practical scripts. We've done a lot of that in session this week. Well, I don't know what to say. I need to have something ready, prepared to go. Yeah, you do. Here are some scripts for you to use. Scripts, strategies, for that boundary setting. And we're going to talk about how to deal with pushback without guilt. This is jam-packed. This is juicy. So grab a coffee, grab a tea. If you're listening later in the day, maybe you want to grab something a little bit harder. Send this episode to a friend and let's dive in to setting those really healthy emotional boundaries. What are emotional boundaries then? And what aren't they? So emotional boundaries are not selfish. Yeah? There is this idea that somehow having a boundary is selfish. It's not. Having a boundary is having self-respect. And if you don't have any boundaries, I would query as to whether, or I would query as to what shape your self-respect is in. Yeah, and some Enneagram types are going to find this much easier than others. Some Enneagram types are going to feel that their boundaries are being crossed for me even suggesting that they might struggle with boundary setting. If you're a type 8 or a type 3, and maybe even a type 1, you are very good at boundary setting. You probably know your boundaries really well. If you're a 2 or a 4 or a 9, you might struggle with this a lot more. There is room for both. Okay. And when we're thinking of boundaries, sometimes we think of them as walls. Yeah, I think that's such a big misconception that having a boundary is this huge wall that nobody can climb over and you're kind of locking other people out and locking yourself in. And I think that's wrong. I think that feels really cold. I actually think boundaries are just providing a lot of clarity, right? They're just the fence in between gardens instead of that big wall. Do you like that metaphor? It feels like a fence. Hey, this is my garden and that is your garden. And, traditionally, we don't go wandering into somebody else's garden. We respect that boundary. It's really clearly laid out in our gardens. Are your boundaries clearly laid out? And if they are and people aren't respecting them, why is that? Let's talk about it. There is also this idea that good people should always be available. A lot of the conversations I've been having this week have come back to, have been around texting and always needing to answer to friends or family members. And we're going to talk about it in a little bit more detail, but I don't think good people are always available. I don't think you should always be available. And if that's something that you struggle with, do keep listening. You're in the right place. And finally, setting a boundary is not mean. It's not rejecting other people. If somebody sets a boundary with you, they're not rejecting you. that is a boundary that keeps both them and you safe. And that's a really key one as well. Type 2s, I might be looking at you there. But boundaries are separate from rejection. Yeah, people are allowed to set boundaries. You are allowed to set a boundary. And the reality is that just makes for a healthier relationship. Yeah. So what are these common myths then that I was talking about at the beginning of today's episode? I think these myths are we see way more with women. I do work with men. I worked with a man last week. As I said in my very first episode, I am for the ladies, right? I traditionally, most of my one-to-one client work is with the gals. And all I'm doing here is decentering men. Of course, these might feel true for you if you're a man. These might feel true for you whatever your gender identity. These are probably more, I wonder if these are more linked, more commonly associated with women. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. Here we go, myth number 1. If I set a boundary, people won't like me. Whoa, people might like you more. Isn't it interesting when we make a decision on behalf of other people? It's so interesting. I do it, you do it, we all do it. We need to stop doing it. If I set a boundary, people won't like me. That is myth number 1, top banana for me. Stop making decisions for other people. Stop deciding when people will or won't like you. You don't know how other people feel. You might be an Enneagram 1 surrounded by a lot of 7s and 3s and 8s, and they probably will respect you more if you set a boundary. Yeah? You don't know how people will respond. But aside from that, if there's a boundary that you need to set, regardless of whether people like you or not, you got to set that boundary, okay? Myth number 2, I should be able to handle everything on my own. So the boundary there would be, no one can help me. I'm not going to receive any help from anyone. What a load of, I was going to use a rude word. What a load of nonsense that is. You actually shouldn't be able to handle everything on your own. If that is news to you, you need to go back to the episode before this one, episode 24, and have a listen, okay? We're not built to do things by ourselves. We're built for community and connection. It's why we have families. It's why we live close to the people that we love. It's why we have friends. You're allowed to receive help. And this idea that we have to do everything by ourselves, and I think this came in with, I want to say, second wave feminism of or is that third wave? Someone can correct me. Where I have the job and their kids and their house and I cook everything from scratch and I am a CEO and blah, blah, blah. Yep, it's not real. And even if it was, I don't know that you'd be so happy doing everything by yourself, because none of us are made to do that, Even you type 5s, you need support. So boundaries can go both ways, right? They can be about setting a boundary, kind of moving against other people. Hair needs some space, but they can also be a boundary that stops people from being able to support you. Think about which one is more true for you. Yeah? Which way do boundaries go for you? And have you noticed how you set them? When you say no, 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 and don't receive any help, do you realize that that is a boundary as well? Myth number 3, boundaries create conflict. That's not true. Boundaries create clarity. If boundaries create conflict, that's because the person who you've kind of set the boundary with doesn't get to use you or have control of you anymore, and they don't like it. So that conflict was probably inevitable. Is it conflict or is it just a conversation? All these different things to think about, yeah? When we're so rigid in our mind with how we think something is going to look, do we perhaps fall into that little bit of a self-perpetuating, self-fulfilling prophecy? Can we allow people to share and communicate with us and us remain open? Do we have to set a boundary in a way that is going to cause conflict? Can we set a boundary in a really clear and concise way? And I also think lack of boundaries really fuels resentment, right? So there's conflict either way. It's maybe just a little bit more passive aggressive if you don't use your voice to set them, yeah? And then myth number 4, it's easier just to keep the peace. Type 9s, type 2s. Type 6s, I'm looking at you. And this is when we're talking about short-term comfort versus long-term well-being. It's similar to myth number 3, right? Is it easier just to keep the peace? Is it easier just to be walked all over? Hard truths this Monday morning, if you're listening when this episode comes out. You need to have a think about what's on the end of these, If you, for the rest of your life, think it's just easier to keep the peace, it's just easier to keep the peace, it's just easier to keep the peace, what happens to your sense of identity, your sense of self, your personhood? What's at the end of that? What is 80-year-old you like at the end of that? I'm reckoning she's not as happy as she could have been. And I present that to you gently and with a whole load of respect, right? All of these myths feel like they keep us safe, feel like it's easier, feel like we won't be kicked out of the group, feel like, you know, we'll be safer. And I think it's just so, and I think a lot of it just comes back to social conditioning. And I think a good question to ask is, do our male counterparts struggle with setting boundaries like we do? No, they don't. Let me answer that for you. They traditionally don't, okay? Traditionally, our male counterparts are socialized to have a really strong sense of self, to know their boundaries and to not let people cross them. Now, that isn't always correct either, yeah? There's growth to be done on either ends of that scale. But what does it look like for you today to consider where your boundaries or lack thereof are keeping you hidden, keeping you small, not allowing you to step into the fullness of who you are? I'd love you to consider that today. Okay, Enneagram and boundaries. How does each type struggle and how does each type thrive? Yeah? Remember, if you don't know your Enneagram type, scroll down through the show notes, grab that quiz, take that test. Tell me which type you are in the comments. Listen out for your number. Okay, so type 1 classically struggle with saying no because they feel this sense of responsibility to everything, yeah? And so type 1s need to set boundaries around perfectionism and overcommitment, yeah? That overcommitment is very different from type 7. That overcommitment comes from wanting to do everything right and perfect, to look after everybody by keeping people safe, by making sure that everything is taken care of, yeah? Type 2s have a fear around being seen as selfish, yeah? And so therefore can struggle with that overgiving, yeah? And type 2s need to have boundaries around their emotional availability and saying yes out of obligation, yeah? That yes needs to be true. That yes needs to be really real. It needs to be coming from a really true place. Probably starts with saying yes to your own needs first so you can learn what that feels like. So you're able to say no. So you're able to say no with a little bit more clarity. Type 3s prioritize productivity and so might overextend to be seen as being very capable. Being capable for type 3s is a big one. And so the boundaries need to be set around rest beyond achievements, yeah? That self-worth that is nothing to do with how well you've done at work this week or, you know, how many Instagram followers you have, or that bonus structure that you hit, or how you're the best mum in the entire world, yeah? We need to focus on our boundaries around rest and that self-worth that comes beyond those achievements. Type 4s can over-identify with emotions, which is not shocking at all if you're a type 4 or if you know one. And they also can struggle with absorbing others' feelings, yeah? So we really need to focus on practicing those emotional boundaries. We need to have greater boundaries around our emotional energy and self-protection. We need to stop leaking our emotions onto other people. We need to stop letting others leak all their emotions onto us, yeah? We need to have a bit of a firmer, energetic boundary there around our emotions. Type 5s, as we know, struggle with feeling depleted, and so rather than setting those boundaries to avoid feeling depleted, they might just withdraw completely. And this comes back to not setting those clear limits, right? And so the type 5 needs to communicate energy really proactively. They need to communicate their needs around space really, really proactively. And this involves a little bit of present or future thinking from the type 5, which is their least favorite thought pattern. You know, type 5's part of the withdrawing stance. 4s, 5s and 9s think backwards. You know, they are time tethered to the past. They kind of think their thoughts are mainly tethered to what's going on behind them in the past. Very rarely are they interested in looking forward. And so that's what we're asking for the type 5 there, a little bit of proactiveness. Type 6s, obviously, are usually worrying about disappointing others. And others is broad there, yeah? So they're worried about disappointing other people, and so therefore can seek external validation. Type 6s are part of that dependent stance. 1s, 2s, and 6s are in the dependent stance. We are dependent on the other people in the room. These types seek validation from the other people in the room the most. Yeah, I'm okay if you're okay is the thought process of 1s, 2s, and 6s. And so 6s need to set boundaries around that kind of constant reassurance that they're looking for. Yeah, we need to put boundaries in around that reassurance seeking and the overcommitting that can come along with it. Type 7s, we know the type 7 wants to keep their options open. They struggle with saying no. They say yes to everything. That feeling of being empty is really present in the type 7s. They're always continually looking at how they can fill up on other people's joy and experiences and life. You know, they want more and more and more. And so we need to set those boundaries around overscheduling for the type 7. And I've written here, committing to what truly matters. Yeah, what truly matters this weekend? If we can't say yes to everything, what matters the most? Can we begin to bring the heart in to the decision making? Type 8s, type 8s have such a strong presence, right? They fill a room, they're incredibly charismatic, they're great at knowing who has the control in the room and then seeking out and finding it and taking it and stealing it. Sometimes consciously, sometimes really unconsciously. But type 8s really struggle with emotional vulnerability and openness. Yeah? When I was talking at the beginning about types, when I was talking at the beginning about those myths where we kind of have decided what other people think and feel and what other people are going to do before they've even done it, type 8s, type 2s, we can all do this, but type 8s and type 2s really struggle with this. Let people show them who you are. Yeah? You don't know everything all of the time. We really need some emotional energy around trust building. We need to have some boundaries around remaining open and receiving support. We need to lower that boundary wall on the idea of I can do everything by myself. I'm completely self-sufficient. I don't need anything from anyone. And this, this is that line between the 8 and the 5. If you didn't know, Enneagram types are kind of connected through lines. And the type 8 and the type 5 are connected. Both types can struggle with having to meet their own needs because they refuse to believe that anybody else can. How can you engage with trust building? How can you lower those boundary walls? How can you let a few more people in this week, type 8s? And then finally, type 9s. Type 9s avoid conflict. They're not into it. They hate it. It makes them ill for days on end. I laugh because I'm a 1, so I can wing into type 9. I know the feeling. Yeah, we all know the feeling. But type 9s struggle to voice their needs clearly. Yeah, type 9s need to focus on their boundaries around their passivity, their passiveness, and prioritizing self-care over just keeping the peace. Now, what that looks like will be dependent on you, type 9s, your individuality there. But we need to focus on not just going along with everyone to keep the peace. Yeah, that isn't actually keeping the peace. Very difficult to self-regulate when we're just keeping the peace. You guys have the lowest amount of energy on the Enneagram, within the Enneagram. We need you to be self-regulated. We need that nervous system working really, really well so you're not using up all your energy trying to regulate yourself. What does it look like to do conflict really well? What does it look like to share, use your voice about what your needs are and how you feel? It's a big challenge. There's big challenges there for everybody. That's a big challenge for type 9s. Ways to know if you're not a type 9, you love conflict. Yeah? 8s, 7s, 3s. That's you. So I think knowing what to say, having something ready to go when you are beginning to put that boundary in place is really, really important. How do we communicate our boundaries with kindness? How do we communicate our boundaries really clearly? Here are some of my favorites that I've shared this week in session that I would like to share with you now. You might have your own. In fact, so good. Drop in the comments if you have your favorite kind of boundary, your favorite go-to script, your favorite go-to saying when you need to put in a boundary really clearly and kindly. Here are some of my favorites. I appreciate your invitation, but I need some rest this weekend. I care about you, but I can't take this on right now. I deeply care about you. I love you. I honor you. I can't take this on right now. I really value our friendship, but I need to step back from always being the ones to initiate the plan. I really value our friendship, but I can't always be the one to initiate plans. Would you be able to? You know, see how that opens up that conversation. Hey, this is how I feel. I'm wondering how you feel. How can we work this relationship out to serve both of us? And you might be thinking, oh, that sounds really scary. Sounds like a lot of guilt would come rushing in there. If you're in the feelings triad, shame might be really, really present with those, with kind of having to say those boundaries, to put in those kind, clear boundaries. This is how I think you should handle guilt. We should borrow from the type 7. We should borrow from the type 7 because they're very good at reframing pretty much everything. Yeah, they're the master of the reframe. I think we should reframe guilt here because the guilt isn't serving anybody. It doesn't serve anybody at all. It's really unnecessary. Doesn't mean that it's not there and it isn't real, but it's not actually helpful. So I think it's totally okay to reframe in this instance. This is how I would reframe. Boundaries help me show up better in relationships, not withdraw from them. Boundaries help me show up better in relationships, not withdraw from them. Boundaries help me show up better for myself and my friends and my family and my kids and my dog. Boundaries help me love better. Boundaries help me show up more honestly. Guys, how many people would be hurt if they found out if their friends, family, people that they love were doing things out of obligation? It would kill me if I found out my best friends were just doing things out of obligation. That would be awful. I don't want to be doing things out of obligation. That is so harmful. You don't want to be doing it either. Let's put in these clear and kind boundaries. Yeah, let's show up as the absolute best version of ourselves. If we're all doing that, right? If we're all showing up as the best version of ourselves, think about how relationship dynamics could shift and change at work, personally. I think it's really exciting. Send this to somebody who you love and adore, who needs some support with their boundaries. Send it to them right now. Have a conversation about it. Use me as the buffer, as the sandwich, yeah? You know, we've talked a lot about setting these big boundaries today. I'm only asking you to start small, yeah? I'm asking you to inquire about what that could look like. And perhaps that first boundary you set is maybe just not texting back immediately. I think in every single session I've had this week, people have felt overwhelmed, chaotic, like they can't catch their breath. And when we were looking at things to kind of take out, to grab a minute, a lot of it was putting the phone away for an hour, you know, at the end of the workday. So we're not immediately jumping in to try and sort everybody else's problems out or be there for everybody. You know, you're allowed to take a moment. If not replying to texts immediately is a great way to start small and set that boundary today, you should do it. Use me as your excuse. Use me as your inspiration. Do it. I'm so proud of you. You can do this. That is a very low risk boundary to set. Why? Because you are 100% allowed to not reply immediately. Begin with something low risk, like replying to that text when you're ready, when you've been able to collect your thoughts, when you're not running on empty. Yeah. And if you end up dealing with a bit of pushback, you know, how do we handle that without the guilt? We can, to a certain level, expect some resistance, right? We can expect some resistance from the people that benefited from you not having that boundary. You know, they might not like the change. That is a possibility. It's scary. It's true. It's going to be okay. What to do when somebody reacts poorly? Let's talk about it. Stay calm and reaffirm the boundary. If somebody is losing their shit because you're not replying to a text or you're taking the weekend to have a bit of self-care time, we all need to take a step back and wonder if this person is okay. You are allowed to set boundaries. Because remember, setting boundaries is not about controlling other people. That's not a boundary. A boundary is about what you need to do and doing it. I'm not going to come this evening. because I'm feeling really tired, or I'm feeling under the weather, or I feel like if I keep going, I'll end up in burnout. I'm not able to help with that because I've got work, I've got a big presentation, and I need to focus on that. Type 2s might be thinking, oh my gosh, how could you ever not help your friend? But remember, by staying calm and reaffirming your boundary, you're kindly and clearly communicating what you need, not what they need to do. You're not trying to control anybody else. It's completely about what you need. You're setting a boundary for you, and that is 100% allowed, okay? Then I would also try and avoid over explaining. Yeah, you don't owe anybody a justification about why you're feeling tired, okay? You know the signals your body are sending you. Or, if you don't want to go to something, the body, the signals your body are sending you. You don't have to go. You're allowed. You're a whole human being. You're an adult. You're allowed to make the best decision for you. You don't owe anybody that justification. Don't fall into the trap of trying to explain to a person who is maybe not respecting you in this moment. Don't fall into that trap of trying to appease them. You can't. They don't want to be appeased. You could say something like, I totally hear this is hard for you, but this is what I need to do to best honor me. Full stop. End of sentence. That is the end of that. You're allowed. You can see where guilt might come in. Put a boundary in against that guilt, You are allowed. You are allowed. Set the boundary, then come and listen to this part of the podcast again. You're allowed. As long as you're not controlling anybody or harming anybody, of course you aren't, then you're allowed to set that boundary. Do it. Someone else's disappointment is not your failure. That is 100% on their side of the fence. Feels really hard, but you can do this. I totally believe in you. As we come into close for today, I really, really want to challenge you to set one boundary this week. That could be a boundary within yourself. That could be a boundary with somebody that you love and care about. That could be a boundary with somebody that you work with. I challenge you to start small. And I also challenge you to leave it in the comments, if you can, if you feel able to. Have that little bit of accountability. Boundary setting is absolutely a part of being in relationship and being in friendship with people. It's totally okay. In fact, when friends share boundaries with me, I feel honored that they feel, safe enough to share that with me. Hey, I'm really sorry. I'm not feeling well enough. I can't come. Oh my gosh. Thank you for telling me. That is so awesome. And also just look out for when people respond badly. When people respond poorly. That might be speaking to the bigger picture about what that friendship looks like at the moment. You're allowed to take a step back. You're totally allowed. So we've talked about those common myths. We've talked about your Enneagram type and how each type struggles and thrives with setting boundaries. We've talked about those practical strategies, those scripts, and we've talked about how to deal with the pushback, with the guilt. I hope that has filled your toolbox up to be able to set really clear and kind emotional boundaries. But I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you're listening to this and thinking, oh my gosh, I just feel so overwhelmed, I feel burnt out, I feel chaotic, this feels like I'm never going to be able to do it, you might really benefit from my Overwhelm to Overflow course. It's an online self-paced course. Within it, we talk about self-care strategy, we talk about boundary setting, we talk about where we might be emotionally leaking, we talk about energy and how we can protect it. You might really benefit from that course. It's self-paced. You can find the link in the show notes. It might really serve you at this time if you're struggling with that burnt out, chaotic, overwhelmed feeling. It's linked to the show notes. Have a little look. I think it could be really beneficial for you at the moment. I will see you next week for another episode. Oh, and actually, just before I go, thank you so much. A few episodes ago, I shared that would we be interested in bringing some guests on? Is it the right time to start doing that? And I've had a lot of people reach out and say that they'd like to appear on the podcast. And I've had a lot of people say, yeah, I'd be really up for some guest interviews. So we have a few lined up. Some really, really, really cool gals coming on, and they're going to share about intentional living. They're going to share about their Enneagram type, their Enneagram experience. there's some really nourishing, deep, beautiful, powerful conversations. And so I just wanted to say thank you for letting me know that you'd be up for that. And yeah, I can't wait to get the first guest episode out in the next couple of weeks. Ooh, it's going to be good, you guys. I hope you have a great rest of your week. I will see you back here on Monday for another episode. And I hope you have a fantastic time setting in those clear and kind boundaries. I'll see you then. Bye.
If Guided the podcast resonated with you, why not share it on your socials or send it to your friends? And if you have a spare moment, I would love it if you could leave me a review. These small gestures are free and they're invaluable in helping me amplify the reach of Guided the podcast, connecting us with more empowered women who are eager to increase their well-being. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to stay in the loop with our latest episodes. By subscribing, you'll stay connected and receive a weekly dose of inspiration directly to your inbox. Thank you for being a part of our community, for showing up, and for your commitment to personal growth and self-discovery. Until next time, take care of yourself, stay curious, and keep exploring the depths of your own inner wisdom.